Hello from the other side of the world. I'm in Seoul, South Korea, but wanted to continue our learning together. And so today's daf is Nazir daf nun bet. I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. And here we go. So in the Mishnah that we learned on Mem Tetem Bet, we saw that a Nazir must shave in connection with the Tara process if he becomes Tameh al Shidra va'al HaGilgolet. That if, as a result of being in contact with the spine, and then Vi'al or the skull, then that's going to require him to not only go through the 7-day purification process for being tameh to a cadaver, but to a corpse. But it will also require that that the Nazir shave and therefore wait an additional amount of time, potentially even the entire period he'd need to wait again, and so as a result of becoming tameh, and as part of that, he would need to shave his head and essentially restart his nazirut. The issue is that the letter vav can mean either and or. So which is it here? And now, if we take a look at our Mishnah, it says al Shidra al HaGilgolet, and so that certainly suggests that it should be an or, because each of the word for spine, the Shidra and the Gulgolet, the skull, each get their own al or on or regarding. And so that certainly suggests that each of them would be viewed independently. You might have imagined that the Mishnah would say al Shidra v'Hagilgolet if it meant to say on both of them. But the 13th century commentary, the Rabbeinu Peretz, notes that in Olot, in Perek Bet Mishnah Aleph, that there's a reference there to Hashidra v'Hagilgolet, which is much more ambiguous. And so the Gemara is going to now attempt to answer this question as we pick up with the 2 dots at the top of about 9 lines down on the top of Nun Bet Amud Aleph 52a. So again, Hashidra v'Hagilgolet, and indeed you can see from this language, this is not the language from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says al Hashidra v'al HaGilgolet, and here we don't have the word al. So this is matching up with the language from Masechet Olot. So Ibailahu, so they asked the Shidra v'Gulgolet nan. So we learned these 2 concepts. Al O Dilma. O Shidra O Gulgolet. Do we say that maybe it means both, or I read the beginning incorrectly? Shidra Vigilgolistan. Are we saying that it means and, or O Dilma, or possibly O Shidra O Gulgolis, that it's an alternative? So those are the 2 possibilities that we have. And so now the Mishnah is going to the Gemara, is going to effectively try 5 different efforts to answer. First, we're going to go 2 in one direction, then 2 in the other direction, and then 1 more back in the first direction, and all of them are going to be unsuccessful. So we really aren't going to answer this question, but let's see how the Gemara works through all of these issues. So let's go through it. So Amar Rava. Rava gives us the first potential answer. Tashma, how about the following? Let's learn from the following brisa, the following, and prove that in fact it means or. So Shidra Shigera Rov Ilin Shaba that Tahora. That if in fact you have a set of a spinal column where most of the ribs have been cut off, so then that's going to be tahor. Kaver, but if it's all in the grave, well then afilu mishuberes o miforekes. Then even if the ribs are broken or removed, so then tmeya mivnei hakever. Then they're going to be considered. The whole thing will cause a tuma to be conveyed, and as a result of the fact that the kever, the grave, is going to combine it all together. And if we take a look in the rush, it's opposite the first of the widest lines in in Tosos, maybe one or two lines above that. It says ubekever afil nishbro nifrika tmeya shehakever mitzarfim. It doesn't actually say that word in the Gemara, even though it's in the at least in this edition, it's in bold, indicating it's part of the heading. But the idea is that the grave itself will cause the unification of the different bones that are in the grave. Dahachi Gemiri and Rush says that in fact is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and so that's the story, and we'll see that referred to in a moment. So time of mishum degera. What's the implication? The implication is that it's only because the ribs were severed that in fact they're no longer causing tuma. So halogirer. So if they, hologirer, if they were not actually separated, so then tame, so then they would remain tame. So the point is that if and what is that consistent? Shmamina o shidra o gulgolas katani. So this shows that it's either or, because if the spine had in fact been whole, the implication is that it would have caused tuma even without the skull. So the response is that it's not a good proof, because haloktani, that we didn't actually learn that. Hakamashmalan, you're essentially saying that this is what it's coming to teach us. Maybe it's coming to just teach us the following: gerad tahora idach tibailach. That although I can tell you for sure that if in fact the spinal column was cut, so it was not a whole spine, well then it's certainly going to be tahor. But if you did have a whole spine, well then tibailach, maybe it would still be a question. So as a result, our first effort has been unsuccessful. So we go on to our second effort. So Tashma. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shisha Dvarim, Rabbi Akiva Mitame v'Chachamim Matarin, that there's a baraisa that says that there are 6 things. Rabbi Yehuda teaches that there are 6 things that Rabbi Akiva says are tameh, that the Chachamim said are not. They're tahor. So Chazar bo Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva retracted them. So let's take a look and see what they are. Umaisa shehevia Kupa Malaya. So and one time, well, actually, we'll see what there are in effort number 3. But at the moment, before we see what they are, let's take a look and see what happened. So there was once a situation where what happened? You had a box that was full atzamos that was Malaya atzamos lebeita knesset shel Tarsiim, that was taken to the shul where coppersmiths were. So we learned elsewhere in Shas the fact that the shul, specifically the shul in Alexandria, had different sections to it. It was a very large structure, and people would sit by profession so that they would have an opportunity, presumably not during davening, but they would have an opportunity to engage in networking and connections. So, but the bottom line is that it was brought into that area, but it was left underneath the open sky, and so that as presumably so as not to create a tuma throughout the entire structure. And so in walks Todos, the doctor, along with all the other doctors, and they all take a look at the box and they say, "Ein kan shidra mimesechad." There's no single person's spine here. It's a mixture of a number of different people. And so as a result, we don't have a whole spine in what's here. So as a result, and presumably the implication of that was that as a result, it would not convey tuma. So not convey tuma through an ohel. So taima deleka shudra demachada. Well, the implication is why is it the case? Because it wasn't all a spinal cord, a spinal column from one corpse. Ika o shudra o gugolas demachada nazir megaleach aleha. But if in fact there was one, well, then the nazir would need to shave as a result of it. So shma mina o shidra o gugolas nan. So doesn't that show that it's really telling us that our Mishnah is really saying or and not and? So no, again, lo mi bai kamer. We can understand the doctor's statement as saying a more inclusive or a greater statement than was even necessary. So what are they saying? So lomi by shidrid the gugolos to mace echad leika. Not only is there no spinal column and skull from a single corpse that they could tell from the box of bones, but there isn't even a complete spinal column or a complete skull from one corpse. That's what they were saying. And so it doesn't actually tell us anything about whether or not you need one or both. So those are the two efforts that go in the direction of saying that we should have that we should understand our Mishnah as being or. Now we go to two efforts to understand it as and. So Tashma Miminyana. Well, let's take a look at the count, right? We mentioned that there were 6 items that Rabbi Akiva ruled were tameh, and the Chachamim said that they were tahor. So what are they? So Umah Hein Shisha. So the brisa that we were just learning continues, and it says Umah Hein Shisha Dvarim Shrabbi Akiva Mitamim v'Chachamim Mitarin. What are those 6 items? So item number 1, Al Aver Min Hameid Shaba Mishnei Meitim. That if you have a limb from the dead that comes from two dead bodies, so then that would be sufficient. A combined limb that would be sufficient to create that Rabbi Akiva would say that's tamei. Al aver min achai sheba mishnei b'nei adam, or a limb from 2 living people. That would be a second possibility. Or a half kav of bones that comes from 2 different corpses. Or a revi'it of blood that comes from 2 corpses. And a bone the size of a barley grain that's split into 2. So again, that Rabbi Akiva would say is problematic, while the Chachamim would say is not. And v'ashidra v'agugolet. Well, 1 second, and then of course there's the spine and the skull. But the problem is let's go through the items. There was a limb from a dead person, 2 dead people, limbs from 2 living people, a half kav of bones, a revi'it of a quarter log of blood, and then a bone the size of a barley grain that got split in 2, and then we have the shidra and gugolos. That's the spinal column and the skull. So we have that 6-1 was a combination of both the spine and the skull. And so doesn't that show that we have to understand it as an and, because it was considered one category on its own in this list of 6 items that the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva disagree about? So the Isal Kadaitach O Shidra O Gugolis, and if you were to say that it should be or Hani Shiva Havyan, that would end up being 7 items in the list. So we're going to come up with 4 different explanations for how we can say, even though this list has now 7 items, if we say it's an or, how we can understand that really it's 6 items, or 6 items that the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva disagree about. So Kikatani. So here's answer number 1, that when we said that there were 6, Kol Heichad de Pligi Ale Rabbim, we're talking about the 6 situations where multiple people argue with Rabbi Akiva. Lafuki etzem kisaora de Yachid hu de Paligale. That is different from the situation where you have a barley grained sized bone that has been cut in half, and now because in that situation, Rabbi Akiva only disagrees with one rabbi. He doesn't disagree with multiple rabbis. And again, this brisa began by saying that we're talking about the situations where Rabbi Yehuda says that there are 6 things that Rabbi Akiva rules as tameh, and the Chachamim, plural, rule as tahor. So Titania, etzem kisaor shenechlak lishnayim, because we have a brisa that shows that this is a machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and one person, because Rabbi Akiva matame, that Rabbi Akiva says that when you have a bone the size of a barley grain that's split in 2, Rabbi Akiva says that it's tameh, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri matayar, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that it's tahor. So so that would be one way of turning this list of 7 into 6, is to say that we're talking about 6 of the items where there was a machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and multiple people. A second way to turn this list of 7 into 6, that when we said that there are 6 areas of disagreement, we're talking about 6 areas of disagreement about something from a corpse, not something from a living person. And so as a result, the Eber Min Achai, which was the second item on our list, right? The second item on the list here, that would not be on our list of 6 items that the Rabbi Akiva and the Chacham disagreed about, because that is not about that is not about limbs from a corpse. It's about limbs from a living person. So that would be the second explanation for how we could turn this list of 7 into 6. That what are the 6 things that we're talking about? We're talking about the 6 things where if a Nazir were to be in an ohel with the item, well, then the Nazir would have to shave his head. Lafuki etzem kisaora delo. So that would exclude the situation of a bone the size of a seora, of a barley grain that was split in half. And so that would be a situation where we would not require, because it's just too small to require a Nazir to shave his head. And so if the Nazir were to be in an ohel with it. And so as a result, that's not going to, so we've again excluded that same item, and therefore have now again approached a way of dealing with the situation. So we have 3. That's now 3 different approaches to say that we're going to say that it's not that this list of 7 items is not actually 7; it's actually 6. The ibayis aima, and the final explanation. You can also explain ki katani, that when we said that there were 6 disputes, kol heichad hadar bay, those are the situations where Rabbi Akiva went back on what he had said and changed his mind. Lafuki reviz dam de lo hadar bay, and it could be that when it comes to the revius of blood, the quarter log of blood, that's one where he didn't change his mind. De amar le Rabbi labar kapara, because we have a situation between where Rebbe said to Bar Kapara, Lo Tishna Revius Dam Chazara, don't include the blood, the quarter log of blood case, as one in which Rabbi Akiva reversed his opinion. Sharei Lemude Shal Rabbi Akiva Biyado, because he would regularly teach this and say this teaching even later. And also the pasuk itself seems to suggest that this is the case, because what does it say? Val kol nafshos mace lo yavo, that you should not approach any dead bodies. Nafshos plural. And so that how do you approach multiple dead bodies? It's where you have the combination of the blood from two different cadavers. And then Rabbi Shimon said, Ad Yamav Hayam Mitame, that during the entire time that Rabbi Akiva was alive, he would always say that the quarter log of blood would act from two corpses combined together would actually be sufficient to cause tuma to pass. But if he changed his mind after he passed away, Eino Yodea. If that were true, I would not know. I'm not aware of that. And of course, you can't know what anybody decides after they pass away. And Tana, we learned a brisa that said, because of this, Hushcharu Shinav Mivnei Ta'aniosav, that Rabbi Shimon felt so terrible about the wording that he used in connection with Rabbi Akiva, that his teeth blackened as a result of the numerous fasts that he undertook in order to do kapara for having spoken that way about Rabbi Akiva. So now we're ready to go back to trying to answer our question. Again, the question is the vav of hashidra v'hagugolet and or an or? And so now we're going to try again to say that it's an and. So Tashma, come and listen. We're going to hear another brisa. Tanya, we have a brisa that taught Beit Shammai Omrim Rova Atzamot Min Ha'atzamim, that if you have a quarter kav of bones, that's going to be sufficient to cause tuma to pass through an ohel, even if it's from multiple bones. O mishnayim, o mishlosha, whether it's 2 bones or 3 bones. Ubeit Hillel Omrim Rova Min Hagaviyah. You need a majority of the body, a body frame. Merov habinyan, o merov haminyan, and it needs to be a majority either from the structure of the frame of the body or from the numerical count of the numbers of bones. So Am Rabbi Yoshua Yicholani la'asos divrei Beis Shammai v'divrei Beit Hillel ke'echad. I have the ability to figure out a way to understand Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel as being consistent with one another. Beit Shammai omrim mishnayim o mishlosha o mishnei shokim shokayim v'yarach echad. That when Beit Shammai is saying that from 2 or 3 bones, what they're really saying is either from 2 shin bones and 1 thigh bone, o mishnei yerachayim v'shok echad, or 2 thigh bones and 1 shin bone. Hoel v'rov gavho shel adam megoba, since most of a person's frame is accounted, the height of the person is accounted through their legs. So as a result, these bones would constitute a majority, and so that would be sufficient. Ubeit Hillel Omrim, Beit Hillel says min hagaviyah ome rov binyan ome rov minyan, that it's either from the majority of the structure or the majority of the number of bones. And ho v'yeshnan b'mifrike yadayim v'raglayim, and since this includes the hands and the feet, well then that will get us to a majority, that even though you might not have you might, without including the entire hands and feet, you might not have so many bones, but when you include them and still have a structure, according to the alternative view of Beit Hillel, is that if you just have enough bones, if it's a majority of the bones of the body, well then that will trigger tuma as well. And so we've now we've shown how Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel could be the same thing, that when Beit Shammai says 2 or 3 bones, it means specifically the bones that are very large, that would constitute a majority of a person's frame. And as a result, you also have this concept of a majority of bones as well. So all of that would indicate a consistent. And then we have a statement of Shammai. Shammai comes in at the end here and says, Shammai Omer, afilu etzem min hashidra o min hagogola, that even a single bone from the spine or from the skull will be sufficient. Well, 1 second. Doesn't that show that in fact we now have a proof to support the fact that it should be an and, because Beit Shammai, which is the strict opinion, is saying that you need one or the other, and the implication is I'm sorry. So this is suggesting that it is back to an or situation. And so isn't this an indication of that one or the other would actually be a problem? And so we say, no, shiny Shammai de machmir. Maybe Shammai is different because Beis Shammai is more machmir. Well, in that case, livshot mina. So let's learn from that. So now this is effort number 5. Time de Shammai de machmir. The reason that Shammai says that that you need that either a spinal cord or a skull is sufficient is because he says or in connection with them. So what's the implication? Harabanan ad deika shedra vigugolos. So presumably the rabbis would say that when it comes to shidra and gugolos, you need both. So the answer is low. No, even there, we're not going to require both. Ad kan lo pligi rabbanan alei de Shammai. That the rabbis don't dispute Beit Shammai in this point. Ela be'etzem echad de'asim min hashidra u'min hagugolos. Except that you need to have a single bone that comes from the spinal column or from the skull. So as a result, aval hecha de'isi be'enei. But if that skull or spine is intact, afilu chada minhon, but maybe even one of them as a whole will be sufficient. So in the end, we have not successfully confirmed anything. We have left ourselves with the question, and so there we have the today's daf, and we've seen again that and what we get from this, of course, is the spine and the skull are treated more strictly, and as we saw in the Mishnah that we learned a few days ago on Memtet, that the spine and the skull are treated more strictly than other bones when they are complete. And so, with respect to causing a Nazir to it is more strict than other parts of the body when it comes to causing a Nazir to have to shave his head. So the question that we're now going to deal with is this also true when discussing the volume of the bones? If we have a set volume of bones, if it includes the shidra and gugolis, can that volume be less and still be problematic? And for that discussion, please stay tuned to tomorrow's daf. God willing, tomorrow's daf will be back in person and over Zoom at the regular time of 7:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Savings Time, excuse me, now that we are on Daylight Savings Time. And I look forward to continuing our learning together then. Have a wonderful day.